Welcome to the Hiding in Plain Sight podcast, where we explore the transformative power of inclusivity and the strength found in vulnerability. I'm your host, Lindsey Mazza, and with each episode, together we will go on a journey of reconnecting with all parts of ourselves to foster healing and inspire a more inclusive and compassionate world for all. So grab your headphones and settle in for soul-fulfilling discussions that will make you laugh, provoke thought, and be the catalyst for growth. Let's dive in. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Hiding in Plain Sight podcast. I'm so excited to have Tim Culbert joining me today. Tim is a lawyer and mental health advocate, and he is the partner and owner of Purvis Culbert Law. And we also happen to go to law school together. So I'm really excited for us to reconnect and have a really frank conversation today. Welcome, Tim.
Yeah, nice to see you.
So just to give everybody a little bit of a backstory. So Tim and I were not in the same class in law school, but we both went to the University of New Brunswick in Fredericton in Canada. And we've recently reconnected based on, I guess, what would you call it? Our passion projects and desire to bring to the forefront the challenges that exist in the profession of law. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I call it's a passion project, but I think also it's something that, would you say, fills our cup?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like specifically speaking, I mean, do you want to explain a little bit about what the passion project is for you and how that came to be, and what stage you're at right now?
Sure. So I came by this pretty honestly, as most people who are involved in this area as lawyers. I have suffered from depression and anxiety for as long as I can kind of remember. And so when I started law school, so my starting year was, I think, 2008, 2009. This was a topic that was discussed at the time, but it wasn't really in the forefront of people's minds. It was obvious at the time. We kind of got those discussions of look to your left and look to your right, and one of you won't be here. And it was the competitive landscape that we all existed in. But it really wasn't until years later that this has kind of taken on more national significance. So I spent a good portion of my law school career doing advocacy. So I was one of the co-founders of it was called the Mental Health and the Law Society, which actually started in 2009, I believe, when I was in first year law school. And so I started at that point, and we did a symposium with different speakers involved in the law and in the mental health field. And so, that was always a passion of mine. And it's just something that after I'm now almost 13 years of practice, now that I've kind of established myself a little bit more and it's becoming more pertinent and more talked about in the profession, I've decided that I want to be involved again because, as we said at the beginning, it kind of fills my cup to talk about this topic. I think that anybody who's practiced in any capacity has to recognize that we've got some real problems in the practice, and they're impacting people. And I think that if we don't do something, we're going to continue to have those problems. Like, frankly, just to give you an example, my associate who has been out of law school for about a year, she was telling me that a good portion of her friends have already left the practice. Right. And that's huge. And I think any of us who have experienced what we've experienced, listen, it's a good gig. I always say to people, I love it 85, 90% of the time, but that 10 or 15% can be really tough. And we're not always given the tools on how to deal with things when they get tough and the resources. And frankly, we don't want to admit that there's issues. So I think that I just kind of came back to it saying, like, this is kind of my true north. This is what really does it for me personally, is to talk about this topic. And it just happens that it converges that everyone else is talking about it right now as well. So, that's kind of where it's come from.
Yeah. And first of all, I don't think people are talking about it as much as they should be, or as honestly as they should be in the legal profession. And I think, just to go back to you pointing out, at the beginning, basically it was in within our first week of law school, because I remember this conversation very vividly. We were all sitting in that, you literally come in the law school, the room to the left, and you don't know
Mhm.
anybody, and they,
Right.
right, it was the intro chat of like, exactly like you said, look to your left, look to your right, somebody will have like, it went beyond mental health issues. It went,
Oh, absolutely.
it was, people are, you're going to be suicidal, will suffer with addiction issues, substance abuse issues. And my recollection of that conversation was not one of, hey, we acknowledge that this is a tough profession. And if you
No.
experience these things, let's talk about them so that we can help each other. It was more of an insensitive initiation process. Like,
Yeah.
the ones who remain standing are the ones that have been able to withstand the toughness of this career. And it kind of just is what it is. So you should just accept that from the
We
beginning.
got through it that way. And so in order for you to be a proper lawyer or law student, you've got to go through it as well.
Right. So we're just going to warn you that it's going to be a tough journey and some of you just aren't going to make it. But we're not going to give you the tools to help yourself, and we're not going to take any steps to make it better.
Right. No,
Right.
that's certainly the truth. And I think that the hard part about it is it is tough out in practice, right? Like nobody prepares you for some of the tough conversations that you're going to have with clients or with other lawyers or with judges. But I think that there's a place for us to talk about these things and do better as a profession, to
Mm-hmm.
recognize, that it's okay to look at somebody and say, yeah, they're probably struggling right now. Let's just lay off a little bit, right? Like we don't. It doesn't always have to be that way.
Yeah. And I think that part of the problem, as you know, I've left the profession, and I did that because I wasn't interested for a multitude of reasons. I have another journey that I know I'm meant to go on, but part of what pushed me to that point was just the toxicity of the profession. And there's a lack of acknowledgement of how we do this to each other as lawyers,
Yeah.
right? Because it's not just that the profession is difficult, because lots of professions are difficult. It's that it is a profession, and this is my opinion, and it might be controversial, but I don't really care.
I love it.
Because, right,
Let's
it's
let's have some real talk
right,
here because I feel like
like,
we've glossed over it.
yeah, I think that it's a profession where we, what's the word I'm looking for, is we perpetuate the bad behavior and the lack of the human element to how we interact with each other. This complete dog eat dog world. It's senior lawyers who are supposed to be mentoring junior lawyers, but they're not mentoring them, they're breaking them in. It's abusive. Lawyers are abusive to each other, clients are abusive to their own lawyers. It's really a day full of being beaten up and
That,
then waking up and doing it again the next day. And
yep.
also figure out how to run your business if you're a private practice lawyer, because you weren't taught that in law
No,
school.
not at all.
Right? And then fight to get paid, and then go to a courtroom and have judges yell at you when you're just showing up to do the best that you can do for your clients. It's real. And I don't believe that I'm dramatizing the experience, because I think that,
No, this is funny. So I've developed over the past several years some new habits that I've
mm-hmm,
implemented to try to ground myself in this. And one of the ones is I'm addicted to the Calm app. And my family kind of has a laugh that they know that if the birds are on, because there's a bird song that I listen to, and they're
yeah.
like, "Oh, it's been a day if the birds are on in the car," right? Isn't that sad that you even have to say that okay, we're such a profession, but I think in a lot of ways it doesn't have to be that, because there are really good examples out there of, like, I've gone toe to toe with people, and we've done it in a way that still zealously advocates for our clients, but also is respectful for the other side, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've walked away, and I've actually said, like, I really appreciate how you did that. Like, for win or loss, however we made the arguments, there's ways to do that. But I think in a way, we've, you said perpetuated, but we've perpetuated this kind of myth that the way to get ahead is kind of, there's words I could use here, but let's just
Use
say,
them.
is to basically be a jerk, right? Like, that's, I'm being
Yeah.
diplomatic here. Like, there are other words in my brain. I just, but
Yeah.
like, so to say that, and you, like, I think what a lot of people, and what I've learned to do, and what's really important, is I'll say to clients, like, listen, if you want somebody who's going to really fight hard for you and advocate, and in some days never give up on things until things are settled, I'm your guy. But if you want somebody that's going to step over that, like, imaginary ethical line and make myself go down to the level of somebody else, like, I won't do it. I'm not your guy. That's
Mm-hmm.
not, whatever picture you have of somebody on TV that's going to treat people that way, that's not my jam. And I think that's freeing to finally kind of find yourself and how you're going to practice, and be given the freedom. I'm lucky that I'm in a small town and I run a small practice. Busy, but I can kind of control things enough that you know I can have my own life, but also when I really want to work hard, I can, and there's some
Mm-hmm.
flexibility built in. But yeah, no, I think you're right. We've perpetuated that, and I think that's a big part of the tragedy of what's going on in the practice, is that, you know, despite our talking, I don't know that changes are happening quickly enough.
Yeah, I don't think that they are. I think that it's the problem, as I see it, is that it's a world in which everybody's viewed as your opponent and your competitor. So people are not inclined to help lift each other up. It's almost like if you're successful, that means I'm going to be less successful. So it's
Yeah.
also, right, this perpetuated competitive nature that breeds like crushing your opponent. It's crazy. Like you said, it's about not wanting to talk about it because that vulnerability is interpreted as a weakness. And the unfortunate reality is the lawyer that you're opposing is waiting to take advantage of that weakness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, which is
Yeah. That's,
very sad.
and what that does, I think, as a practice, it pulls us all into that scenario where we don't want to show any kind of weakness, and therefore we kind of bottle it up, or it's funny because there could be any myriad of things going on in your life,
I know.
but when you put on the suit and you show up, you've actually got to try to just put that all aside, and forget the humanity part. And that's a darn shame. No wonder people are struggling. And I think the recent studies that have come out on what's happening in the profession, it's an inflection point, and I see a lot of really good things being done. I was at a conference a couple of years ago, and it was a mental health conference put on by the Bar Association in New Brunswick. And there were judges there were lawyers there that stood up and talked about their struggles. And somebody got up, um, kind of three-quarters of the way through, and said, like, this is the best CLE conference I've ever been to,
Mm.
right? Like, how freeing is it that we're all finally in a room talking about the elephant in the room, that this has been a problem and we've got to fix it. And you slowly start seeing different organizations coming up with plans to do something. But in my opinion, it's still not fast enough. I feel like we're spending a whole lot of time studying the problem, and sometimes you just start doing things, right? Like, that, just take the next right step, and as long as you're incrementally making things better in the practice, then I think that's good, instead of just sitting around studying it. But that's a criticism that I have, but it
Well,
really is maybe.
I think that's fair because people, I mean, I think the other problem is how the profession is very siloed. So it's not like judges and lawyers are not on the same page, right? So that's the other problem is you're creating and you're trying to make these changes, but if we're all not getting together and acting like we're on the same team, they only go so far, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure. And I'm sure there's going to be some kickback by some of the old guard as people start making progressive changes. But I think most firms have really grasped onto this area and said, like, at least from appearances, that we're doing the things that we need to be doing to try to make the practice better. It's not just the speeches they
Mm-hmm.
gave to us in law school, right? Like you just got to go through it because we went through it, right? Like that's just the way it's always been. And
Right.
but then you kind of look around and you kind of go, well, let's take stock of this. There's high rates of alcoholism. There's high rates of drug abuse.
Mm-hmm.
There's high rates of all kinds of mental illnesses. There's high rates, I think, of divorce in those in a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
practice. And when you look around, you say, well, if that's what that is, that's not for me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just considering myself really lucky and privileged that I've found kind of where I'm happy in what I'm doing for the most part. I can't imagine grinding away for 80 or 90 hours a week and, having it be almost braggable that I've got the most billable hours and this is, meanwhile, like I'm not saying that I'm this, but like somebody saying like I'm on my fifth wife and this is like, and you just kind of go, holy crap, guys, this is not what it should be. And I don't think I think there are ways to make it better.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, I don't know if this is your experience, but for me, I was very good at creating as best as I could the balance in my practice. And like I had my own firm, so I didn't have a boss. And that's part of the reason I started my own firm. And I implemented very clear boundaries. Like I didn't have my email, for example, coming to my phone. So my clients knew that I was not accessible after hours or on weekends. And I got a lot of pushback on
Oh, you
those
do.
boundaries
Oh,
from
you.
right from other lawyers and clients. So it's not easy to be the person going against the grain, but I needed to maintain that for my own well-being. And I had a very successful practice, but I always felt that judgment from other lawyers of like, oh, you don't work past this time or you're not going to work on the weekend. And I always used to say to them, like, if you've been practicing this long and you're still working at this level, you're doing something wrong because you haven't figured out balance, and balance is what makes it sustainable. But it wasn't easy going against the grain for sure.
No, no. But I try to think of it as I want to make it sustainable. And so that, like, if I'm pushing myself so hard that my health
Mm-hmm.
takes a hit, I mean, you're not going to get anything from me, right? So
Exactly.
I have to find ways to balance that and have a life and spend time with family and to have hobbies and I actually do think that makes me a better professional
Yeah.
because I'm not so tired and I'm not, I can find answers easier when I've actually taken the time to just let my brain sit. Like, and sometimes I come up with my best ideas when I least
Yeah.
expect them. So that's, so I think, it is tough to go against the grain, but I think people are starting to do that. And there's a lot of hope for that. Yeah. I know Justice Strathy was the Chief Justice in Ontario, has spoken a lot about these things. And he's actually talked about why every firm should have like a code of conduct for how they operate. And one of the things that I have implemented, for example, like I've learned how to use emails that send like the next day, schedule them for
Right.
whatever. So at least the message that I'm sending out to people sometimes is not, I'm not inaccessible. It's just that I may send a message and it'll pop out at 9 o'clock the next day. And when I get time to do it, I will take care of it. But that doesn't mean I'm just sitting there anymore at my phone all the time. And I might get wrapped on the knuckles once in a while from my wife, and she'll hear the ping on my phone and say, "You're not going to answer that, are you?" Oh yeah, no, I'm not going to answer that. I swear.
Right. I mean, but
But
that in and of itself, the fact that we feel that we need to be answering our phones at all hours, like again, we're just perpetuating it, right? And I think
yeah,
that that is a real easy actionable step that people can put in place because at the end of the day, you know, you've only got your health, and working at that level where you have zero downtime, eventually everything's going to come to a head for you.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And so I've really tried to implement as many of those things as I can to make sure that I'm more sustainable in my own practice. And it's really helped a lot. And I don't, if I think if anybody is upset enough that they think you're not accessible, maybe they're not. That's the other thing. Maybe it's not the right fit,
Right.
right? But the ones that do work with you and find that fit, and it's good for both, then I think that everybody gets a lot out of that. And I think that's something that lawyers don't necessarily do well, because we like that we're able to solve these problems, right? Like I love it. Like every single day I come to work and there's usually never a dull moment, because there's something that I need to figure out. There's like a puzzle that I need to find a way through, and that's enjoyable, but there needs to be limits to that.
Right. So, in terms of your mental health advocacy, so apart from, do you want to share a few things that you've implemented at a practice level for you? Because I think it's good to share kind of tips and tricks, because it's not just in law where people are really suffering because they're overworked and their mental health is not a priority. So, what are a couple of things?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that I've kind of implemented is really, I mean, the email is a big one, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that is the quick way that people can access you at all times. And I think I've just become more strict on when I respond to emails,
Yes.
right? Like you might get an email from me that says, got your message. We'll get back to you in a day or two. And I do mean that. I will typically get back very quickly, or I will respond and it'll go out the next day, or I'll wait till the next day to respond. And it's just, I think that's a big one, because you can kind of get in that cycle where you feel like you have to
Yes.
respond right away. I think with office staff, and how we do things with that. I think unless I absolutely have to, I'm not going to contact you off work hours, right? Like
Well, this is
it's
the other
it's
thing, is it's not just lawyers who suffer from this
yeah,
toxicity or mental health strain. It's legal assistants and law clerks and paralegals. Like,
absolutely.
I think they have the hardest jobs because I know how the majority of them are treated.
Oh, it's brutal sometimes, and I can recall a few stories of recent incidents where somebody said something to a staff member, or they say, like, I don't want to talk to you, I want to talk to Tim about this. And I kind of go, well, I mean, I have no better answers than what they're telling you, right? But it's, so I think, no, that's definitely something that you have to consider. And I really think like a full cultural evaluation of how you're doing things, and
Absolutely.
learning. And it's tough, right? Like, and I think also just being open a little bit more with things, like being able
Yes.
to say, hey, I just went into this case and it was brutal, right? And just so you know, you might, if you come in and talk to me, it's nothing to do with you. It's just because I've just gotten a strip torn off me, or this has happened. And so I think that's a big part of it. And I think just trying to talk more openly about those things, and just trying to say, like, yeah, like this is literally a downtime for me, and being open about it. I personally don't like the winter. I've never liked it.
You don't
It's
like what,
cold.
sorry? The
Don't like the winter,
Oh, the winter. Yes.
right? Like something as
Yeah.
simple, like I know a lot of people like that. So I have one of those vitamin D lamps that I think I got in law school, and I've used it ever since, and it actually really helps.
Right.
So I think just small little things like that are extremely helpful for me. And then I think just learning that I control what I do, but I really don't control what anybody else does. And that's the biggest thing for me, is that sometimes I just don't respond to certain things. Like
Right.
the snippy messages, or the whatever. I just kind of look at it, and I've learned to find a way to not let that get to me as much, and respond to it. So those are kind of 4 or 5 things that I think I've implemented personally to make sure that I'm as level as can be. really, I think if anything, it's helped my practice. It
Yeah, for sure.
hasn't hurt it at all.
No, I would agree with that. And I also think, talking about your culture assessment for people who have firms, I think it's the the fastest way for you to do a temperature check is to check in with your staff, right? Because I never understood how lawyers could treat their assistants so terribly. It always boggled my mind watching these, senior lawyers. Literally, I've seen people throw things at their staff members, yell at them in public, you know, and it's just the way you should never treat anyone. And it always, first of all, boggled my mind how you could treat another person that way. But secondly, like, this person literally helps you function every day. Like, without them, you do not have a successful practice.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think that that's also a culture shift that needs to happen, is I really having this positive environment for your staff where they're treated as people, not just this cog in the wheel, right? Where they can come to you and have this open line of communication if they feel that there are better ways that you could be doing things, be able to feel comfortable to have that conversation with you. If something's going on in their personal life, that you have compassion for that, and you're not sticking by the rules of employment, right? And how many sick days they have, or let's just treat each other like people.
Yeah, and I think what it comes down to is I think it all goes downhill. And so I think the problem is that we've kind of set ourselves up where, as you said, some senior lawyers
Mm-hmm.
kind of treat people a certain way, and then it all kind of rolls downhill. And frankly, the stress of like dealing, you never know what you're going to deal with on a certain day. That really has an impact in it, and I think it's hard to. I will say for myself personally, I've not always done everything perfectly
Of course.
in that
Me
regard, right?
neither.
And
Yep.
and when I look back on it, I kind of say, well, it's true. Like when you've come out of something very traumatic, and we're human, so even though you're not supposed to have any feelings and you've got to be objective and you've got to do whatever, it sometimes takes a while to shake it off when you've gone through a really tough case or something's happened that's really difficult, and that kind of changes the dynamic of how you deal with other people. And I think that's really unfortunate that
Mm-hmm.
it's like a culture of people saying like that's okay
Yeah.
to do those things, and it gets passed down, and I think that unfortunately everybody bears the brunt of that.
Right. And yeah, I mean, it's just about giving ourselves time to, we're all human. We're all bringing our traumas and everything with us every day. And I think that because of this like rat race, we don't give ourselves the time to process, understand where we're at, and check the behavior, right? And like you said, and that's what happens. Then it just becomes this, keeps rolling down the hill.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I am very hopeful, and I'm positive and encouraged by some of the things I'm seeing. And so I like that we're having the discussions now in the practice, and some of the articles that have been written and the studies that are being done. But again, it's not quite at a pace that's fast enough for me. I'd like to see more action and a little less talk.
Yeah, I agree. And of course there's been advancements, like everything, it shifts with the times, and I think the demand of the younger people coming up. But yeah, there needs to be some more actionable steps. So in terms of, like, can we talk about this, about you wanting to create a mental health group, Tim?
Yeah.
Where are you at?
So I mean,
Okay,
I'm
let me just ask you again because I'll edit that part out. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So, Tim, do you want to share sort of like what you're working towards to help shift the mental health advocacy within the profession?
Yeah, so over the past couple years, I've attended a lot of different conferences on the various different topics surrounding mental health in the legal profession. And one of the things that I think is when we're there and on the ground and we're talking to people, and we're connecting on these different topics, there's a real power in that, in
Yes.
the connection. It's different than me going online and Googling and finding information and whatever. There's a real connection, and it's really neat to sit in a room with people from, for example, I attended one a year ago in Toronto. So to sit in a room with people from all different walks of life in this profession and talk about very shared values,
Yes.
and difficulties that we have. So one of my current projects that I'm working on, I started a not-for-profit called Lawyers with Depression Canada.
Mm.
And there's a lawyer, his name's Dan Lukasik, and he's a lawyer in Buffalo, New York, who started a website in the US called lawyerswithdepression.com. And I think it's been almost 15 years that he's done that. And he is also a wellness advisor to the judicial district. I'm going to get this wrong, but in a judicial district in New York. So he advises judges and court staff on wellness initiatives and mental health initiatives in that state. And so I really want to use that model of that kind of website as a way to connect different people on this topic from all across the
Great.
country, right? And so we're not, there is a really good book out there called The Right to Not Remain Silent, which has a lot of different stories in it about things that lawyers have gone through with their mental health. And I highly recommend that. But, there's nothing that provides a low cost way to connect people to talk about the issues that they're having in practice, and kind of seek advice from people. So like when I read books like that, or when I talk to people who are experiencing similar things, I'm always amazed at what kind of ideas I get from hearing other stories, and saying, oh yeah, you did that. Like, that's really neat. That's a really neat idea of a way to approach that.
Mm-hmm.
Or just that some people have applied in their daily life to basically say, like, I don't care anymore. I'm going to talk about this, and I'm going to talk about the struggles that I have. If other colleagues have a problem with that, that's fine. And so that's really what I want to work on now, is to connect other people in the profession to have those conversations and to share their stories about, as personal as they feel like going, about things that they've experienced and how difficult it is. And hopefully that helps keep people in the profession. And I think young people coming up would certainly, think, see more senior lawyers. It would be a great discussion to have, instead of lawyers having the discussion of, hey, look to your left, look to your right, we went through this, this is just tough, you got to buck up and get used to it. To say, yeah, like, I did have a period of time where I was really struggling 5 years into my practice, and these things were all happening, and I found the best source of solutions comes from the people that admit that they've had those issues before, and
Oh, absolutely.
um, how did they find a way out of it. So that's kind of what I'm working on right now, and I've started a not-for-profit, and I'm seeking some funding for that project, and I'm hoping that in a year or two that we can come up with something that can really connect people on these topics.
Yeah, I think it's so important because, I mean, I think that if every lawyer were being totally honest, I would be shocked if it weren't almost 100% of people who've had some sort of struggle in the duration
Yeah.
of their career, whether that's anxiety, depression. It's it's the fear of talking about it. And I think being able to share and come together really makes you feel less isolated, because it can be a really isolating experience for people.
Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. And it's scary. I know from my perspective, in a small town, you have some colleagues that you can lean on, but there are others that just are farther away. And I will say that the few times where I just decided to cold call and pick up the phone, there are some really good people in our profession, and I've really been amazed at how open and welcoming some people have been, to help kind of guide you through really difficult topics and discussions and problems. And I think that that's a template for other people. There's a program. I want to say it was in Alberta, and one of they call it a red cup coffee circle or something like that. And basically, what it was that they set up this program where they would have a lawyer once every so often, once a month or something, at a public location somewhere, and all they'd have as identifying them was like a red cup, and other lawyers could go talk to that senior lawyer, just knowing that that's who
Oh,
that person was, right? And so it was kind of neat. This lady was talking about this red cup coffee thing, And she was like, but we've had really great success where if you know that, it's private, you can go talk about these things. What a great thing where you can just kind of go, hey, I got to pick your brain here. Right.
Yeah.
Not everybody, like I work with somebody who's been in practice for 50 years. I'm privileged that I can just kind of every once in a while, when he was practicing more, peek my head in the door, go, in your 40, 50 years, have you seen this? And typically, once you get to that point, there's not a whole lot you haven't seen, right?
Right.
But for other people who don't have that accessibility, like there's just all kinds of really great ideas. And it wouldn't take much time out of more senior members of the practice, right? Like some of them are already semi-retired as it is, so they could easily schedule a day, a month, or something just to say, I'm going to take calls from any other practitioners that want to call and ask questions or
Yeah.
pick your brain and ask. And so I think that so I've learned all kinds of things from other areas, and I think that that's going to be the best way to solve some of the problems in the profession is to connect people on what they're doing and kind of ways that they've found to solve some of their issues and talk to somebody.
Yeah, totally. And reminding people that there are so many people out there that are your people, right? It's just about being able to find them and connect. And I think that it feels like they're not out there because we're we're all these like individuals peppered throughout who are going against the grain, and you feel like you're an outlier, but really there's a lot of us out there who want to help, help mentor the younger generation and help each other succeed. And having a platform like that where it's like the lighthouse that can bring everybody together. I think that it's so important for
Yeah,
us to
yeah.
to help support each other.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about that
Mm.
project, and I'm excited about the future of the profession. If all lawyers are just doing their part, right? Just
Mm.
doing their little part of it, whatever you can contribute to making that better. And sometimes it's small, right? Like
Yeah,
it's
just your
not.
time. It's a phone call.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah. So where can people get in touch with you, Tim? If they have,
Yeah, so at this moment, it's my work email, so it's tim@purvisculbertlaw.ca, and that is the main one, but I may have some other ones soon, kind of once I get some of these projects on the go, and I have to kind of set up separate emails to do that. But anybody who wants to talk about mental health in the profession, I actually, oddly enough, have 2 or 3 other meetings this over the next week or so scheduled just from connections people made, and we're just going to talk about those things and let it happen. Let's see what comes out of it that is going to be good for the profession.
and you're on LinkedIn, so people can follow along on your journey as well, right?
You can watch all the pictures of my dog that I
That's
post.
right.
That, oh, by the way, that is one of my favorite therapy things. Is I have a therapy dog. He's not trained. He should be a therapy dog, and we actually have him come to our office every Friday, and we call him our chief therapy officer.
Love
And
that.
it has been incredible to see the the connections that clients make and how that just kind of breaks down walls right from
Totally.
the get go,
Yeah.
and they're more comfortable and so most of the time he's here for other people, and but every once in a while he's here for me as well because there's been days where I'm like, oh, I really need my dog to come to work with me.
Yeah. I mean, listen, something as simple as that can be a real game changer for me. Like when COVID hit, working from home, having my dogs with me, it's really helped shift things.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so there's an attitude there that like some people might say, well, this is a serious profession and we can't do things like that and whatever. But I've just kind of said, like, this is what I do on Fridays.
Yeah.
My dog's coming to work with me, and most people love it. We ask people when they come if they're okay. And I'd say about 95% of people are okay with dogs. And if they're not, he stays somewhere else during their appointment. But yeah, no, that's jokingly. That's at one point in time, someone said that's all you ever post on social media is your dogs and yeah, mostly the dogs.
Well, listen, dogs are my favorite thing to look at on social media. So I feel like that's you're putting into action, bringing the human element to the profession. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I'm all for it.
that certainly comes genuinely. It's
Mm-hmm.
just trying to be who you are and
Mm-hmm.
allow that to flow.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Tim. This was a really great conversation, and I'm so excited to follow you along as this evolves. And I'll put your social links up in the show notes and your website so people can get in touch.
Yeah, same. I really appreciate it. It was nice to connect with you. I like to hear from a what I call a reformed lawyer.
Yeah.
You decided to wise up and
Yeah.
but I'm sure you've got great things ahead.
Yes. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you for joining me on the Hiding in Plain Sight podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. And please take a moment to subscribe and leave a review. Feedback and episode ideas helps us reach more listeners. I would love to connect with you further. You can visit my website at lindseymazza.com and add me on Instagram at Lindsey D. Mazza. Until next time, keep sharing your stories and vulnerabilities because one story at a time connects us all.